to put in place the redesign of Nicollet Mall that you see coming this year. Also, when you concentrate routes downtown, you can provide better amenities at the fewer transit shelters at a lower cost. So you have fewer transit shelters, which means that we can provide the amenities people expect now, real-time displays, heaters, that kind of thing. Fourth, bus speeds are more predictable and they're faster, and bus capacity downtown has tripled. And unlike 10 years ago, now downtown Minneapolis is ready for BRT. Now, there were a few other things that resulted from the change as well. First, because of the concentration of buses on Mark II, we were able to fulfill what was a long-standing desire both from the city and downtown businesses, and we converted both Hennepin and First Avenues into two-way streets. We also added a bike facility on First Avenue, which I'm sure you are aware is hard to describe as good news. This was not something that either the cycling community nor the businesses on the street particularly liked. And in fact, the Bicycle Advisory Committee recently voted to support changing what is a protected lane now into a standard bike lane. The last benefit of the change was that buses have been entirely eliminated from 3rd Avenue. But with all the benefit comes a cost, and it has to do with bike lanes. When the design for Mark II was adopted, the bicycling community was understandably very unhappy that these bike lanes were removed without identification of an alternative. We've been looking for a replacement to those facilities ever since. Corridors that we looked at included a two-way facility on 3rd Avenue, a two-way facility on Nicollet Mall, and even returning one-way lanes to both Marquette and 2nd. That turned out not to be feasible. And through the redesign of Nicollet Mall, the city chose not to add dedicated lanes as part of that redesign, rightfully, prioritizing pedestrian space on the mall. Now, as part of that process, Mayor Hodges said at the time and since that with that decision comes the requirement that we find an alternative north-south protected route downtown. So she asked Public Works to identify a route and make a recommendation, and that is what you'll see today with the redesign of 3rd Avenue. So before we get into the redesign of 3rd Avenue, I do want to take a moment to talk about how we arrived at that as the preferred route. And in doing that, I'd like to talk about 4th and 5th Avenues for a moment. When the 35W bridge collapsed, the rebuilding of that bridge came with federal funds to repair some downtown streets. Now, at the time, both 4th and 5th were in really, really terrible shape, and the traffic lanes on both of those streets were wider than they need to be. So we resurfaced both of those streets and narrowed the lanes to provide traffic calming and to provide for the bike lanes that you see out there today. Now, 4th and 5th Avenues are not good routes for bicyclists. If you look to the south, you can see why. On 4th Avenue, the south end of 4th Avenue is the on-ramp to 35W where bikes can't go. And on 5th Avenue, the south end is the exit from 35W heading north, and bikes can't come from there. So both of those streets are very, very important to the auto network downtown, but they are not particularly important to the bike network. So again, I want to focus on the fact that Minneapolis does not intend to put a bike lane on every street. In fact, doing that would be counterproductive to what we want to achieve, which is quality and safety. We know protected bike lanes are safer than regular bike lanes or shared lanes. We know that volume and visibility improve safety. This is why when we see increased ridership throughout the city, we actually see reduced crash rates. There's safety in numbers. If we were to put a bike lane on every street, we would dilute that. It makes way more sense to put protected lanes where bikes are going to be. So where do we want them to be? Well, Public Works has created the proposed bicycle network downtown and it provides a good spacing of routes. As you can see, there are not too many routes. They're not too close together, which would create a condition where bicyclists would be spread out throughout the downtown core, and it would dilute some of that visibility that we're looking to achieve. But they're also not so far apart that cyclists can't get from one to the other. And you can also see that the routes on Hennepin and on 3rd both have clear access in and out of downtown across bridges to the north and to the south. And then the last thing I want to leave you with today is some potential future decisions that a redesign of 3rd Avenue today can provide. So just as what we did on Mark II created opportunities that we're taking advantage of now, the same is true for the protected bike lane network that you see in front of you there. A protected bike lane, if and when we add it to Hennepin Avenue, could result in the entire elimination of even the non-protected bike lane on 1st Avenue. And a redesign of 3rd Avenue today could provide an opportunity to remove the bike lanes on 4th and 5th, which could provide, you could use that space to expand pedestrian access and greening on both of those streets. And with that, I will pass the baton back over to Public Works to talk about the proposed redesign itself.
Well,
thank you for your time.
Providing that comprehensive context. And Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this was very helpful. It's also the history of the founding of the Minneapolis Bicycle Coalition in some ways. I just wanted to point out with this map that the distance between 3rd Avenue and Hennepin is significantly larger in South Minneapolis than it is in downtown. So if we zoomed this map out, the travel sheds for a bicyclist coming from Whittier or, Carrag or the Lena neighborhood or the folks coming from the 11th Ward or the 8th Ward, certainly Hennepin would be significantly farther away than it is in downtown here. And so I just think it just sort of speaks to the importance of having these parallel north-south routes, that one just on Hennepin, for example, would be significantly out of the way for anyone trying to travel by bicycle from South Minneapolis.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you. Director Kaki.
Mr. Chair, before our project engineer, Chris Engelman, presents the recommended layout of the 3rd Avenue project, I would like to give a little background on the work and interaction we've done to date and why I am recommending the layout that you have in front of you. As Mr. Hecker explained, Public Works was asked to develop a north-south protected bicycle route through what I refer to as kind of the eastern portion of the downtown core. Public Works was in total agreement on this need, and we studied carefully facilities on Marquette Avenue, 2nd Avenue, and 3rd Avenue. All of these streets presented challenges, but it was really the bicycle volume count on 3rd Avenue that indicated it was the right street for the protected bike facility. I think when you look at some of the graphics that Ben has presented, what's interesting is that whether we have a bike facility on a street or not, the bicyclists are going to go where they need to go and want to go. And so, for example, the current counts that we have on 3rd Avenue today, which we don't have any bike facility on 3rd Avenue today, are quite high. As a matter of fact, they're the second highest bike count on the north-south corridors through downtown today. So this is obviously where the bicycles want to be, is on 3rd, and we're seeing that as well over on Hennepin. The layout that I am recommending today was actually our first layout we developed last summer. The original plan and current recommended layouts removed all the center planted medians on 3rd Avenue and eliminates most of the dedicated left turn lanes. So we're moving from a 5-lane configuration to a 4-lane configuration. And it was my understanding at that time that we had general support of the 4-lane configuration that we came up with last summer. However, we did have some concerns. Councilmember Goodman particularly was concerned about the loss of the green medians and the loss of significant loss of greening, and as well as some of the members of the business community. And we were asked to continue looking at options of how to place a protected bikeway onto 3rd. We then conducted a traffic operations analysis to determine the feasibility of a 3-lane option. Our traffic consultant concluded that in a typical day condition, I'll repeat that, a typical day condition, that south of 8th Street, we could convert 3rd Avenue to a 3-lane configuration and maintain the center medians and provide a protected bike lane and operate at a reasonable level during normal weekdays. However, the consultant also stated that the central business district is a complex and dynamic system, including many variables that influence motor vehicle mobility. The analysis considered only typical day conditions. In other words, bad weather, lane or street closures, road construction, on-street parking violations, stadium events may decrease the corridor capacity or increase traffic demand on 3rd Avenue, and these were not evaluated. With these risks assumed, we modified 3rd Avenue layout to a 4-lane configuration north of 8th Street and a 3-lane configuration south of 8th Street. This was the configuration that we presented to the BAC, the PAC, and the downtown community. After numerous meetings with the businesses and property owners along 3rd Avenue, we heard very loudly and clearly that from them, as well as the Minneapolis Downtown Council, Minneapolis BOMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association, and Councilmember Goodman, that that traffic congestion still was a concern for them, and that they would prefer to move back to the original 4-lane option that we had last summer, and that they would work on providing additional greening on the adjacent private properties. Now, I do believe that, these are reasonable concerns, that in downtown Minneapolis, we have a lot of variables, unlike probably throughout the rest of the city. And those variables, I mentioned earlier, and particularly some of those variables that we're seeing today and we'll probably see continue for the next few years is the issue of construction and lane reductions throughout downtown, which means that we're detouring and traffic is coming from other locations on 3rd that we would consider probably not a normal condition. We do know that a 4-lane would handle and be beneficial for the variable traffic issues that we see in downtown. So with that said, I have worked on many street projects in downtown Minneapolis, and I can tell you it's difficult to accommodate the many needs within the limited right-of-way that we have. I do know that the recommendation does not meet everyone's expectations, but I do believe that the layout is a reasonable compromise between interests that we have and meets our primary objective to get a protected bike lane in this corridor. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Engelman to go over the proposed layout that we're presenting today, and then we'll answer any questions that you have.
Councilman Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on the timeline. So I have a packet from October 17th, 2015 that shows the project that you described was a 3-lane proposal. And then I have resolutions from the Pedestrian Advisory Committee from November 4th, 2015 and March of 2016, as well as resolutions from the Bicycle Advisory Committee on October 24th, 2015, February 24th, 2016, and March 23rd, 2016. When did staff make the decision to change from those layouts?
Early March
of 2016.
Of 2016.
So approximately a few weeks ago.
Approximately a few weeks ago.
Okay. I'll probably ask more questions about the public engagement process from staff.
Morning.
Committee Chair, council members, my name is Chris Engelman. I'm an engineer with the City of Minneapolis Public Works, Transportation Engineering and Design. I'm here to present on the 3rd Avenue South redesign project. Third Avenue South redesign extends. The proposed project consists of reconfiguring Third Avenue South from 1st Street South to 16th Street East, with the primary initial goal of adding a protected bike facility to the corridor. The project includes a variety of right-of-way ownership, including MnDOT highway right-of-way, Hennepin County right-of-way, and is primarily a city of Minneapolis designated state aid route. The roadway is generally configured, as has been expressed before, in a 5-lane configuration with alternating blocks of center left turn lanes or a center planted median. A variety of curb uses is also present on the corridor. The roadway was recently reconstructed in 2004 and is in good condition and good pavement condition. Showing an example of the existing configuration that's out there today. You can see the center green median, 2 drive lanes. We don't show any of the curb uses on this block between, I believe this is 6th to 7th. But it does show that the right-of-way extents, number of trees located already on the corridor. On the alternating blocks, the blocks where it does not have the median, this median is replaced with a left turn lane, a dedicated left turn lane. The corridor supports a variety of different modal uses. There's from the 2014 counts of vehicle traffic, it ranges from the mid 6,000 at the convention center to almost 12,000 vehicles per day north of Washington Avenue. It also supports approximately 4,400 pedestrians a day, as well as has been previously indicated, a relatively high bike count of 850 bikes per day. The bike facility is identified in the protected bikeway update to the bicycle master plan. The corridor was selected, as previously explained, as a primary north-south corridor for bike traffic as part of the coordination of a variety of specialized natures corridors and the transportation system in the downtown core. As a part of the stakeholder engagement, other goals were also identified. There was to improve the pedestrian space by adding greening areas, maintain existing greening space as possible, and then as we had more conversation, the mitigating and minimizing the impacts to the vehicle commercial traffic for ingress and egress to the buildings, for deliveries, and a variety of other needs to the properties along the corridor. These were all identified through the engagement process. The project development, as it was indicated by the director, we started in April 2015 with study and evaluation and initiated the 4-lane configuration. We developed more of an alternative analysis. What other concerns, what other things can we do, what other options are out there, and adding greening into the 3-lane configuration south of 8th Street configuring, which was due to the volume considerations of the vehicle traffic along that corridor. We were able to come out with a different configuration, viable, workable, and it addressed a lot of the concerns that had been raised up to that point. There was added to the mayor's proposed budget and adopted in the January 16th adopted budget. And at the time that it was included in the mayor's proposed budget, approximately October, we initiated a wider area stakeholder involvement in addition to the design coordination meetings. We used a range of engagement practices to draw out the input on the project, but due to the timeline desire for implementing the project to get a existing a heavily used corridor, a bike facility, the outreach was coordinated as a dual track. In the sense that we went out, had conversations about what the concerns were at the same time as we were asking about design detail coordination efforts that we had to have with each property. The engagement because of the coordinated design initiatives, early communication with adjacent property owners and advisory committees were necessary to identify the specific technical considerations. Basically, what are the concerns? What are the issues and needs for this corridor that they see on a daily basis? To allow the time to mitigate those impacts through the design process and be able to implement a project as soon as possible. This led to multiple consultations with Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the Bike Advisory Committee, the DID Greening Committee, Metro Transit, the building owners and managers associations, over 30 one-on-one meetings with the majority of the properties on the corridor. Also, a public meeting was held in January, and we visited with the Loring Park and downtown neighborhood groups to have their consideration and input on the project as well. From this input, as the director indicated, the Public Works is recommending a 4-lane configuration. This consists of bike lanes, typically 6 foot, some of it wider, with a buffer ranging in size with a minimum of 1.5 feet. 2 drive lanes in each direction with widths 10 to 11 feet wide and the necessary reaction distances. Green spaces in locations where space and utilities permit. The placements. These locations, such as at Minneapolis City Hall and Hennepin County Government Center, other green spaces opportunities are still in coordination and with the adjacent properties and with the Downtown Improvement District. We have a few curbside uses that will be adjusted, including removal of parking in locations that are direct conflict with the bike and travel lanes. We're developing or working with the Metro Transit for some new bus stops on 3rd Avenue at north of Washington and the existing drop-off bays. As an example of the operational changes that we're incorporating, we are proposing signal system that would be upgraded to a video vehicle detection system for the purpose of timing the left turn lanes, or left turn arrows, I should say, not lanes. What I'd like to do is walk through the layout in brief manner. I want to kind of emphasize some of the more contextual, how it separates and goes through, and they're generally 2-block increments or that I'm showing on through here. I'm going to start at the river and head down towards 94. The first section here I'm showing is the MnDOT right-of-way. We are proposing to remove the parking. We're adding the buffer bike lanes as is consistent throughout the corridor. We have a couple of additional bus stops, one in front of the federal building, and I'll use the mouse on this one, which is up here, and one in front of as part of the new development. They're adding a bus stop shelter as part of that construction effort. And we show green space on this corridor here. This property is an opportunity. We're still coordinating as it is all the sidewalk and that green space is on federal property. The next section is just south of Washington, so it coordinates with and goes into the MnDOT highway section, but it also crosses the county right away at Washington. What we're showing there is some changes to the configuration of the drive lanes and the facilities coming into Washington. We did receive a variance for narrowing up the drive lanes at that location to accommodate and allow for the bike facilities. We also did receive a variance from Washington to 7th to narrow our drive lanes for that corridor. In a general statements, we're showing a lot of green space throughout the corridor. You can see some green little boxes here. We also have a couple of green spaces. In general, we are still coordinating those efforts. We want to talk to property owners as well as the DID to make sure that we're going to put something in that's survivable. It's going to add benefit to the corridor and is not going to be a maintenance nightmare into the future. So these are opportunities as we're showing them, but there are going to be a lot of conversations that we have to make sure that we are doing the right thing. Another element that I want to quickly point out here is we are showing, you don't see this on a lot of city streets yet, but some what I call zebra striping. The zebra striping, you see it on the municipal MnDOT has them as well, right through here, but they're a bit different, a little bit wider for the city's portion of it, and definitely frame up that pedestrian corridor through the intersection. This is a new city element. We're working on developing this protocol, so there may change, some elements change to it, but we're anticipating implementing it on this project. This is also another interesting portion of the, from an engineering perspective, but as also just as a person walking through this corridor, this one has a lot of primary points of access to the downtown. You have vehicle traffic, obviously, on north-south, but you also have the mass transit. You have a lot of pedestrians coming through this right off of the mass transit, also high use from City Hall and the Hennepin Government Center. You have a highly developed corridor. You have US Bank Plaza, which is a good entry point into the Skyway system. You also have a lot of bikes that use this corridor in this area. So this one was a primary evaluation point to make sure that we're not bottlenecking the entire corridor and what mitigations we could do to improve it. We're also working with US Bank Plaza to incorporate some green space. This drop-off bay configuration is still under evaluation and consideration and coordination with that property owner. So it's expected to change. But we are pretty confident that we'll get some green elements to that corridor at that location. We're also showing some green space improvements and a wider pedestrian ramp at the corner of 4th and 4th Street South and 3rd Avenue South next to the City Hall block. Sixth to 7th, this one is pretty much the end of the what I'll term the north side of things, where the south of this point where you start getting lower vehicle traffic, you start seeing 10-foot drive lanes. We still have 10.8-foot drive lanes through here. The other aspect I'll point out here is that we worked closely with Hennepin County, and they were able to get some more green space, actual planting space instead of trees, and a grade, but actually a planted view. As I mentioned, this switches to the 10-foot drive lanes. This is where the volumes of vehicles traveling through the corridor fall beyond the critical criteria threshold that we see for a multimodal corridor. So we're able to do a 10-foot drive lane. We still have the bike facility. You still see the, did I not move this one? There we go. Still have the bike facilities. You still see the drive lanes coming through the corridor. You don't see a lot of additional green space. A lot of the green spaces we're able to find is very dependent on maintaining the 8-foot clear zone that we want to have for the downtown environment. There's a lot of utilities, operations on the corridor, not so much at this location, but utilities are present. There's also areaways and underground parking garages that we're addressing and coordinating with to see where green space is practical.
Question from Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Engelman, before you move on to this next part, could you go back through this northern section and talk about why the original determination was made that 3 lanes are not feasible here? What were the trade-offs with vehicle travel delays, and how did you determine that those were unacceptable from a staff perspective?
Thank you for the question. Committee Chair, Councilmember Bender, that's a mouthful. That's a lot of conversation and design detail. We went through a number of analyses that was referred to The bottom line, pretty much, I mean, the simplistic answer at this point, without getting into a lot of the weeds as to design details, is the vehicle traffic volumes. What would happen if you went down to a 3-lane configuration? How would that impact the neighboring cross streets? How that would impact the intersections for vehicle traveling through the intersection, for vehicles traveling, pedestrians coming through, and a variety of things. So it's an integrated review of how to make sure our network stays mobile and workable, if that's.
Of course, these design details matter a lot as well to the people using the roadway. So I think these are important points, even though they are rather detailed. Did you use a level of service determination to identify which intersections were not appropriate for a 3-lane configuration, or were you looking at traffic volumes? Were you looking at minutes of delay? How did this traffic analysis determine that 3 lanes was not appropriate for the northern section?
Director Elwood?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender. I'm Don Elwood. I'm the Director of Transportation Engineering Design for Minneapolis Public Works. You're asking a very good question when it gets down into the engineering details about delay at intersections and specifically to the corridor of 3rd. I think I want to reiterate, Public Works can make both options work. We've stated that earlier. We can make the 3-lane section option work. We can make the 4-lane section option work. And when I say we can make it work, I have those quotes out there. There are trade-offs. There are mitigation that needs to be put in place with both options. And we are looking at mitigation in the left turn arrows that we're going to put in place with vehicle detection. We're going to use mitigation at the intersection of 5th and 3rd to make things work better. Downtown is dynamic. There's a lot of changes going on, and our traffic operations folks do a great job making changes to the operations on signals to make things flow smoother. So when I looked at the corridor, and we had talked about this earlier, the recommendation for the 4-lane section, there are some concerns about in and out of parking facilities. With a single-lane operation, it's more difficult to get in and out of a parking facility on 3rd. Curbside use is a concern. And the cross traffic coming across at 7th, 8th, 9th is also a concern, and any backups on that corridor. So after looking at all the pieces from a larger perspective in downtown, that 4-lane section is the Public Works recommended layout. Does that address your questions on the specifics?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I mean, looking at the traffic analysis, I mean, it seems that there may have been even an opportunity to explore a 3-lane configuration in this northern section. So in my opinion, I'm kind of taking the hybrid option that was originally presented to our advisory committees, and my constituents hadn't any knowledge of this alternative proposal that's come forward today. When I look at the level of service, even for the alternatives there, I'm seeing A, B, C, there's a couple that go to F. So even with that, even if we looked at the entire stretch at 3 lanes, you may conclude that there would be enough mitigation to even do 3 lanes the entire stretch without having a lot of intersections fail if you're using a level of service test. So I'm just trying to understand, in part, what's the difference between the original recommendation on the northern section and the southern section? Does that seem accurate?
I will not disagree with your statement, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender.
I think we were here before, as far as where I dropped off. Talking about the drive lanes, this was the switch in the vehicle volumes. You don't see a lot of additional green space, and we're still showing all the way through the corridor, the bike lanes, and the protected crosswalks, and the 4-lane configuration. This block Pretty straightforward as for these other ones as well. Some of the benefits are we were able to find some spots on this block that had open utility space is what I'll say, but enough space that we could put in a tree or four and have enough root media to be able to substantiate that, grow that into the future. We do show a loading bay or a drop-off bay at the Ameriprise building as one of the curbside uses that we're intending to maintain. The next section, continuing on the south end, we're showing the 4-lane configuration still through. There's not a lot to be added conversation-wise to this section. And then coming around the corner, around the center, convention center, we're showing 2 lanes into the south and 1 lane to the north. This is a nice graphic that we have that kind of gives a feel for what the 4-lane configuration looks like. It shows the buffered bike facility and the delineators that we typically use in these environments and corridors. You have a bike facility against a 2-foot curb. You also see some of the green space that we're trying to implement along the corridor. This block is right next to the Public Service Center and gives a feel from the existing conditions to the proposed conditions. You can see the turn lane in the center would be removed, and you have 4 drive lanes going forward. The project is on a short timeline. We're wanting to implement this project this year as a proposed project start in 2016. This would be primarily the hard surface pavements, and we want to put in some temporary markings to have a bike facility and operating vehicle facility this end of this year. We anticipate that we would want to come back and finalize this project in 2017 due to the coordination and efforts of the plantings and making sure that any green space we'd have would be able to have a irrigation system as needed. It'll also allow us to have a seal coating during our more typical July timeframe and then have the final durable pavement markings placed at the same time. Our estimate for the project is $3 million. In summary, we're excited to move forward with this project. It's provided a great addition to the downtown transportation network and improvement to the corridor. Hits on a lot of the points that Brandon brought before. This is a necessary north-south connection. We have a lot of bicyclists using the corridor, and we want to get that facility out there for them to work. It augments the multimodal nature of our downtown environment. And working with the DID property owners, property managers to provide the additional green space improvements to the pedestrian environment. We'll just go further along that path to make it a good central business corridor. The neighborhood properties and advisory groups and other stakeholders were very helpful in identifying the concerns and elements that would make this project a success. The communication path that will be maintained and continued as we move forward, and we'll have to close the loop in communication about this short timeline and engagement. But the engagement has not stopped. We will be continuing to have the conversations. We're excited to see a finished corridor as an example of the mixing of many modals choices that you have in the downtown Minneapolis environment. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I'll just note that we have significant elements that are still in play, and I've had communications with the local representatives on the city council. So what I'm going to do is move without recommendation the project layout before us and take further conversation. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. I had a question about the layout, and so I was waiting till the end. Particularly about sidewalks. I noticed that when we were looking at the layout all up and down, we knew the number of feet for bike path and travel lane, but we weren't showing the number of feet for sidewalks. What is the optimum width for a sidewalk in downtown? What's our goal? What's our minimum? And did that it definitely looked like there was definitely one loading dock that got added, and it looked like there was a 12 or 15-foot sidewalk. I think that might have been by the Thrivent building. So what were we were looking for an 8-foot sidewalk minimum, or do we have a minimum?
That's a great question. Committee Chair, Councilmember Gordon. Throughout the corridor, this project was identified as a redesign. It's not a full reconstruction. We weren't touching a lot of what the existing curb lines are. So what we were attempting to do as far as the greening analysis is to make sure that we had enough pedestrian space through zone as demonstrated in our Access Minneapolis and our sidewalk plans guidance for the downtown environment. Typically, that comes out to be about 8 feet wide through zone that we were looking for. You can go a little bit less than that when you're balancing the priorities, adding trees and a variety of different things, but still the goal, if at all possible, is to maintain that 8-foot clear zone through the corridor.
Okay, thank you. 8 feet. All right. Keep that in mind as we discuss things further.
Councilmember Bender and then Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think all of my colleagues know how important this corridor is to me and my constituents, as my ward just starts a few blocks south of the extent of this project. I'm going to go ahead and move a substitute motion. I had communicated that to staff and my colleagues, and that would approve the 3-lane option for 3rd Avenue South for the portion south of 7th Street, which includes 3 vehicular travel lanes, the center planted medians, and the planter protected bike lanes in both directions. My intention here is to go back to the layouts that were presented to our Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So if there's anything incorrect in those technical details, I had sent them to Director Kotke to check ahead, but that is the motion I would like to make as a substitute.
Substitute motion, Councilmember Palmisano, followed by Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions for Mr. Engelman, if that's
Please.
all right. Let me get back to them. First, I really appreciate the context from Mayor Hodges' office. Thank you. It reminds me why we've allocated, so much money for this project, and why we're removing a big amenity, being the planted medians that have gotten mature and they're beautiful. Can you go back to the 3rd Avenue area that is just outside this building, outside of City Hall? One of my chief concerns that I've voiced since last summer has been about how police maintain the best, safest access possible to the drop-off area that's accessed here. It's used for juveniles, and it's critical that we not be any further away from that entry. The other important aspect of this side of our building being about pedestrian improvements. It's a major thoroughfare, and the Pedestrian Advisory Committee expressed significant concerns about it, and I think that's very warranted. Mr. Engelman, would you say that this is improved from a pedestrian standpoint, and can you assure me that while we've reduced the number of vehicles that can be parked here, is it understood that this is still for police as they need to access it? This is the area of the building that you're talking about, just the lower right part of this slide that you have up.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
if perhaps if I could answer that. First off, in the pedestrian advisory resolution, they indicated their concerns and problems with the sidewalk adjacent to us right here along 3rd between 4th and 5th. We are in total agreement. That sidewalk is inadequate. Actually, it's inadequate on both sides of City Hall here, and it does need to be addressed. This project is not going to resolve that issue. We agree that it needs to be addressed, and as I had mentioned to the chair, is that we will continue to look at providing a better sidewalk environment there. I'll tell you, there's a couple of issues at hand. One is police department operations. So we need to continue working with them to see if we can find alternatives to parking. The other issue at hand, though, that put it outside the limits of dealing with it during this project is this building has what we refer to as an areaway. So the basement extends out under the sidewalk, and the manner in which the streetlights are tied in there makes it a complicated situation. Not that it can't be resolved, it just is going to take more work, both from an operational perspective as well as from an engineering perspective, to make those corrections, so that there will be some improvements made with this project, but we are really not going to resolve the real issue, which is we need to widen the sidewalk along that corridor.
Thank you. My last question is, since we aren't moving curbs and we're planting a tree or four, as you mentioned, how is that set up for success and not being some kind of drilled tree coffin? I know we're not moving curbs here. So is that something to figure out further along the process, or is that something you already have a plan for?
Committee Chair, Councilmember Fasano, we do have, I'll see if I can get to that relatively easily here. We do have a plan, working with a variety of partners and stakeholders in the park board as well. What we would want to do is make sure that there's enough root media underneath the sidewalk. So we would be removing more sidewalk in this location at between 9th and 10th, and taking the concrete panels off, taking the compacted material underneath there and putting in a more of a structural soil system underneath the sidewalk. We still have to taper it back from the curb line to make sure that we're not undermining the curb. And there's when I say there's not curb being removed, we are removing small sections of curbing to be able to do that. So that's the situation. We need to do this. We don't believe so at this location, but we would want to put in the 500 cubic feet of media for these trees to really have a chance to grow.
And that will not compact the sewer line or cause some kind of huge backup. It sounds like we're not impacting the sewer underneath it.
That's the intent, yes.
Thank you. That's it.
Councilmember Yang?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out that I thought I heard you make a motion to forward this item with that recommendation, and then I've heard Councilmember Bender make a motion with regards to what she passed out in front of us, and it seems like those two motions are competing, if anything, and I'm wondering if we could address one before the other.
We would take the substitute first. And my recommendation is to do the motion that I made, because it accommodates the time to work out some of these other issues that are some of the secondary and tertiary components of this project, knowing that in no way, shape, or form is the primary objective in question. So it's more of the issues on the edge. So with that,
I do have several more questions for staff. We didn't get to the southern section and vehicle volumes, service levels, any of that. So I just want to acknowledge.
So you have more questions. Okay.
Significant.
Okay. So Councilmember Glidden, and then Gordon, and then you.
If Councilmember Bender has more questions, then I'll go ahead and let her go, because mine was more in the nature of a comment, although just because we're kind of getting down to what is this debate between the multiple layouts that have been out there, and so I don't know if staff has brought any visual, just so we can understand what that visual was of the 3-lane design, knowing that staff's recommendation is the 4-lane, which you've presented. So,
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon?
Oh, thank you very much. And I wanted to speak in favor of the substitute. If we want to get questions out of the way, that's fine too. Also, I will note that I have some pretty deep concerns about the sidewalk in City Hall and the pedestrian realm there, and I'd like to talk about that and have a motion on that, but maybe we better decide. So I just want to make sure that's in the queue, whether we go forward with the substitute or forward with no recommendation. I want an opportunity to talk about that afterwards, and I'll be a good committee member and stick on the motion before us. So I actually was excited about the presentation that I got. I wasn't informed in part of the fully 4 lanes up and down the whole route. I didn't get informed about this project until there was a presentation made to me in my office where it was 4 lanes for some and 3 lanes for other. And I appreciated it. I liked it. I accepted it. I thought it was great. Not too long ago, I heard that there was pressure coming from business owners, particularly in the area, worried about what's going to happen if they lose a lane. And that reminded me of some experience that I have had, some big projects that I have lived through. I could understand that completely. It seems to happen every time we have a project and we're going to remove some lanes that a lot of people are worried and fearful about it, concerned about it, have objections, can't believe it could ever possibly work. So I thought back, Riverside Avenue, that was a